Hello again. Here is my another video to allow me to hear myself talk. Pretty much, I guess is the only way to describe why I keep doing these additional videos. But there's way too much for my supposed 250 word entry that ended up being 370. But I'm not apologizing for that. So here we go. Um, in my writing, I talked about the development of sexuality within elementary schools, but the other reading that really struck a chord with me was the Basil reading um, about who is being disrespectful. The title was similar to that, but as this study was conducted in my home state of Colorado, I felt an additional connection to it as I have been a teacher in Colorado and I have talked about and seen and even questioned some of the practices that happen within the school, um, not necessarily with black or dark skinned students, but just with generalizations and categorizations of students in general. I do see, of course, when I taught in Colorado, it was Western Colorado, so it was more immigrant or migrant worker and Hispanic families. And to a T, 90% of the office referrals were Hispanic boys. And just the way they interacted that was different than their normal peer group, caused conflict within the school, mostly because almost all the teachers, 95% or more, were white teachers, and they had their expectations of what student behavior should look like within the classroom. So when it was challenged through a different culture of respect, then there was the consequences for not meeting the norm that was established by the teacher, by nobody else. So there was that, and I can 100% see that. I mean, it even takes place in our school to some extent, not quite as dramatic as the small sample size of the Basil article suggested, but even within our international school context and having a culture, a home culture of China with I guess you would say, a completely separate view of what um, growing a boy into a man. I know that's gender norming, but different view of what a young boy should and could be like or act like, and what a young girl should be like or act like within a school context. So, um, you know, when I have my son, like my little boy who's only one, and I can even begin to notice with grandma who helps take care of little Nicholas that when he does some things that I kind of cringe and say, oh, I want to try to make sure that behavior doesn't develop into something else. I may like move over to correct the behavior or promote a more positive behavior, and grandma is supporting that behavior and cheering, oh, you threw the dinosaur onto the ground, yay, you're such a strong boy. And where I'm like, no, I want him to learn to be more respectful of his toys so he can be more respectful of his peers and his peers' toys farther down the road. That may be the teacher in me, but it also may be the white teacher in me coming from a Western upbringing and versus her Chinese upbringing. So when we transfer that into the school and the boys are acting in the ways that their grandparents and their parents have promoted at home, and then in a Western school context is no longer deemed acceptable, there's this conflict, and not just on the conflict of the surface of the first behavior, but the conflict of challenging ideals, both developed ideals of mine and underdeveloped ideals that they have, right? And so often we kind of lump these kids together and say they don't really know, so they don't have a belief or value system already established, but that's not true. They do. They may not be able to articulate it in the way that we are, but they still have something established there. To get back to the article in the context of the U.S., the other thing that I voiced and challenged, and something that kind of crosses the two topics that we were discussing this week, was the overprevalence of males in special education. When I taught in the U.S., I was eager to have special education students. We had a few different programs at our school, from moderate needs with the, just our kind of spectrum of learning disabilities to severe needs like Down syndrome or cerebral palsy, to we even had a behavior support needs, kids with emotional regulation issues. So we had 3 programs running in our school, and I was always eager to have those students in my class. And in the 7 years that I taught at that school, I probably had 20 plus identified students on IEPs, and one of them was a female. The rest were all males. If I look back on any of the other classes or any of the other grade levels, I cannot identify more than this one girl that was the only female special ed student in our entire school, with a school with 3 programs that went pre-K to 5. And that disparity is something that I brought up, and it was dismissed. And it made me wonder why we didn't explore it further. And I think specifically I brought up a student who was of Mayan descent, and it was just quickly labeled that she was EAL, and her issues stem from her language, not from her developmental delays or possibly dyslexia or something of that nature. It was just quickly dismissed, like nope. She couldn't qualify. We're not going to test her. So that kind of idea of, oh, here's a boy who's struggling, he must be on the spectrum, or he must be having some developmental issues or something like that he's quickly identified. But the girls were overlooked. I don't have a better word than that. It was a very frustrating interaction with because it was me, our special education teacher, the head of special education for the district, the principal. We were all in a room, and kind of unprompted, I know it wasn't very professional, but kind of unprompted, I brought up, why is this one girl the only girl in our entire school of 3 programs receiving special education services? Well, that's it. A little bit longer than normal, but I just wanted to talk about